to get an overview of Christianity. And so to do that, we've got to remind ourselves about some aspects of Judaism, such as the anti-temple prophets we saw with Amos and Elijah and the like, attacking the temple institutions and the money-making that takes place, and how those temples collude with government authorities to enforce unequal social hierarchies. And then we also had our pro-temple prophets, like Haggai here, who wants God to build him a house. So there's an yin and yang, if you will, in Judaism between the pro and anti-temple prophets, and thus the establishment or anti-establishment prophets. And among these more anti-establishment prophets, we see Jesus starting his ministry in the Gospel of Luke, reading from Isaiah. In Isaiah, we saw the axial age emerges with Judaism as a pure monotheism finally is definitely intact. Judaism had been evolving towards a pure monotheism for many centuries. And we may recall Israel on the invasion route between the big powers. In this case, we recall with our last unit on Judaism that the Roman Empire is now dominating Judea and larger Israel, the whole region. And so this creates immense social stress on the Judaism of Jesus' day. And even though Jesus, through his course of his career in the Greco-Roman Empire, will become more and more a God-man, in his day he stands out as a fairly typical Galilean mystic, a wandering prophet of Israel, more than the God-man like Heracles and Dionysus that he'll become in time. So there is this whole history of invasion, from the Babylonian captivity to the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great. Now the Romans will be the greatest devastation to the Jewish people up until the time, I would say, of Mr. H, if you know who I mean. And then among the Jewish sects, we can see Jesus standing out as a teacher, a rabbi in a synagogue. And that makes him a Pharisee, those set apart, those working in the communities, if you will, as apart from the Sadducees, the pro-temple aspect of Judaism in Jesus' day, and these will seek to undo him. And along with that were zealots who wanted politically and militarily to overthrow the Romans. Jesus was not one of them. If those who live by the sword die by the sword, Jesus is a pacifist. Hence no real threat to the Romans, but a real threat to the Sadducee temple establishment where the money's made in Judaism. And finally, it's worth mentioning the Essenes, a mystical sect out in the desert waiting for a war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, when God's holy angels would come and liberate Judea from Roman oppression. We can say much about Jesus, and certainly his open regard for non-Jewish people, hence, and he got in trouble for that, along with breaking the law, the Sabbath, and the like. Is the Sabbath made for man, or man for the Sabbath? And so the big debate in Christian theology for these millennia now is how much is Jesus a prophet and how much is Jesus a God? We'll find the whole spectrum represented on this big issue. He was born far away from the center of Judaism, Jerusalem, up in the north in Galilee. And there he lived among Greeks. It would be surprising if he didn't know any Greek, at least as much as the average American would know Spanish. So he's from the hinterlands. What good could come from Nazareth? That's what they said about him. But he's still a Jew. He's not a Samaritan, the despised northern Israelites who broke apart with Judah back after the time of King Solomon. We really don't know much about his childhood and upbringing. It's said he's born in Bethlehem and then fled to Egypt as King Herod seeks to kill him, and then returns like the Israelites in the time of Moses. So among these, we know Jesus had friends among the Pharisees. These, again, were the rabbis based on synagogue Judaism, diaspora Judaism, the Judaism that is the ancestor of all modern Judaism. And then the Sadducees, again, the chief temple priests. They're the ones who want to stop this madman. If someone went into a church in America today and started throwing the offering plates around, I think they'd arrest him too. So on the nameplate on his cross is Jesus Nazarini Rex Judaios, Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. But as he clearly stated, in all his acts in his life point to the fact that he was a pacifist. If my kingdom is not of this world, if it were, my men would fight. So he's talking about a spiritual kingdom of God. He doesn't seem to have cared much for the Romans for sure, but he does care about a just society and a righteous, law-abiding, loving people. Within a short time of his death, we've got disciples spreading throughout the Roman Empire. And we're going to have three early sets of Christians. One will be the Judaizers, led by James the Just, the brother of Jesus, who took over the Christian church in Jerusalem after the death of his brother. Standard Jewish practice. The relative then takes the high priestly, if you will, status. Then we also have the Gnostics on the other side. Some took Jesus in a more Hindu fashion and saw him as just an avatar of Vishnu, if you will, an appearance directly of God, the true God, not the creator God of the Hebrew Bible. They thought he was merely the God of matter, and there was a true God of love beyond the sphere of the seven heavens or the material realm. They even declared that Christ neither really ate nor drank. And finally, it's Paul the Apostle who serves as a bridge between the two perspectives, the Jewish prophet view, Christ is a man, and the Gnostic view, Christ is purely God. So it's not so much that he's a genius, although he was an excellent writer in classical Greek and a well-trained Pharisee himself. And of course for the Pharisees, Jesus was too liberal for them. And Paul the Apostle started his career persecuting early Messianic Jews, because that's what Christianity is. And if we think of the word Christ, it's from the Greek chrisomai, to anoint. And so we can call this a Messianic Judaism in the beginning, and then it'll eventually evolve into full-fledged Christianity we have today. We see a rift even in the New Testament between Paul the Apostle and James the Just, brother of Jesus. If we read their letter, James the Just sends down a party to investigate Paul. If we read the letter of James, we find he is a vain man who's made up his own religion. As for Paul, he makes a big argument that Abraham was saved by faith, not by works, and thus we get the doctrine of Christian grace. Faith alone can save one from torment. So Christianity, as it travels through the Roman Empire, Jesus picks up these features we can ascribe to the old Greek and Roman gods. Dionysus, he turns water into wine like him. He's also called the Good Shepherd like Hermes, and as well, like Heracles, he descends into hell and then is resurrected and becomes an immortal in the heavens. This will take some centuries, and we can see it evolve in the creeds of Christianity through those centuries. So as Christianity spreads, the slogan we get for this movement in Acts is, "In Christ there is no slave nor free." We find this religion will appeal to especially urban slaves, and that will be the focus for, really, Judaism was a slave religion, and then Islam as well, very slave-friendly, and hence they're the biggest religions, Christianity and Islam today, in large part because most people are slaves. And it's surprising for me to note that maybe as many as 10% of the Roman population was Jewish. Romans looked at the Jewish Bible as an actual history of the world, as some do still to this day. And there was a great respect for Jewish monotheism among educated Romans. And with Paul the Apostle's innovation, getting rid of circumcision in particular was a rather unappealing practice to have to undergo for males in the Roman Empire, along with all the kosher laws that Paul the Apostle says are no longer necessary in this time of the Christ. And so one might wonder, why were Christians, pretty nice people if we read their books, persecuted by the Romans, even to the point of having to fight wild animals, being burnt at the stake, or having to combat each other as gladiators? If we think about it, Christianity was a kind of communism. In Acts it says they shared all their property in common. A kind of atheism, because with one God, that means Heracles and the emperor are not considered divine any longer. A kind of treason to the Roman Empire. Christians would not offer incense to the emperor because they didn't deem him divine. And finally, the rumor was that since Christians adopted babies abandoned at the rubbish heaps, the orphans, and took them in and raised them as Christians, that though they did this, they also were known to drink blood, the wine, and eat the body, the flesh of Christ at their services. But for the Roman, they thought it was one of these Theestian feast cults, which actually did exist, where they ate little children. So we should never judge a cult just by its being new. However, by 325, after 3 centuries of sorrow and persecution, the Christians won. They had permeated now not only the slave class in the urban regions, but also many aristocrats had converted to Christianity. In fact, modern cathedrals are modeled on the homes of Roman aristocrats. And in 325, Constantine the Great comes along, the great champion of the Christian faith, and he converts to Christianity, makes it legal to publicly worship as Christians, and in fact convenes a Council of Nicaea to formulate and codify this religion. He needed a strong religion to unify his empire that was now largely Christian. So many see it as a political move rather than a true religious conversion of the heart. His vision of conversion was seeing a sword in the sky that looked like a cross. And so at Nicaea he convenes a council to determine what books are official and Christian and what books are not. And that is why Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are in the New Testament, but we won't see the Gospel of Thomas or the lately discovered Gospel of Judas even in there. And we'll also see a formulation of the creeds. The Nicene Creed is the last of many, and here it's clearly stated that Jesus is of the same substance with God the Father himself, and we find that he descends into Hades and then returns and is resurrected. These are features we won't find in the New Testament. This is the admixture of Greek philosophy with the old Jewish prophetic faith. Hence, Christianity, like Buddhism in China, a collision of Taoism and Buddhism, and to some extent Confucianism. Christianity is another collision religion, if we can call it that. A blend of Hellenism, of Greek thought, and Judaism. So we had back in the day 4 classical patriarchates, or fatherhoods, if you will, of Christianity in Jerusalem, Corinth, Rome, and Alexandria. And these are the cornerstones, establishment speaking, of the Christian traditions. We'll see that one of these, the Roman Patriarchate, or Latin Patriarchate as the Eastern Orthodox call it, will grow quite large into the largest denomination the world has ever known, Roman Catholicism, with about 1.2 billion people today. But originally, these were all co-equal patriarchates of the Christian faith, at least the Orthodox and universal faith. There were many diverse and sometimes strange movements, like the Ophite Christians worshiping the snake in the Garden of Eden as a deliverer of wisdom to the people. And in time, Constantine and Roman authority will close down a lot of these, ban the Gnostic Gospels for sure. The Jewish Christians will die out when the Romans attack the temple and mass deport the Jewish people. So what's left is St. Paul's Church then again, this blend of Greek and Jewish thought. In time, Emperor Justinian will even close down the Greek philosophical schools. So Christianity, the formal Orthodox type, with the first cathedral, Hagia Sophia, in Constantinople, named after Constantine. Now we have more or less the rudiments of the Christian faith as we know it today. In time, of course, we'll see the dread Germans pouring in across the border. Pushed by the Huns themselves, Germans with the names of Vandals and Goths and Visigoths will overwhelm the Roman Empire in the West. The Eastern Roman Empire will linger on another 1,000 years, known as the Byzantine Empire. But in the West, the persecution had been extremely severe. In fact, more so than in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. We'll see dark theologies such as that with the Church Father St. Augustine, who will develop the idea of original sin, that we're actually born sinful by way of copulation itself. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, they claim, well, we don't see this doctrine, and we see more the idea that we can become divinized humans by following Christ and even attain his miraculous powers. But we'll have a little more to say on that in a moment. When the Germans overwhelm the Western Romans, what government is left? Only the church. We'll see that the Pope of Rome will evolve into a kind of ghost emperor of the Roman Empire, and the church itself and its bishops will become, even in many cases, military governors of Western Europe. So with the church as the only government really in Western Europe, we can say thanks God for the Pope. We will see out of all of this the Holy Roman Empire will emerge. History teachers like to say it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, but there you have it. It is officially Christian and governed indirectly by the Pope, a loose confederation of German feudal kingdoms, if you will. And thus in time, we'll see the Western Roman Empire becomes the Roman Catholic Church, and in the Eastern Byzantine Empire, we'll see the Greek Orthodox Church emerge. In time, missionaries from the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox side of the Roman Empire permeate upwards, if you will, into Northern Europe and start civilizing those Germans and Russians. But they won't be fully Christianized for quite some centuries. And of course, in this period of time, the Arab Islamic Empire has emerged and threatened to overwhelm the Western Roman Empire. They will conquer as far as the borders of modern Spain and around the bend, if you will, on the other side of the Mediterranean up to the Byzantine Empire. And so this panic creates some union between the East and the West as they face a common enemy as they saw it. And it's important to note that in Western Europe at this point in time, things are pretty backward. The Arab Islamic Empire will be the seat of science and learning, bring mathematics and even Arabic numerals from India to Europe. Try adding up those Roman numerals, MC, DC, VII plus LCX. It's a little tough job. So Western Europe will also be civilized again by the Islamic Empire, which will also bring back Greek learning in this period known as the Dark Ages. So if you like sugar or coffee, you can thank the Arab Islamic Empire. Muhammad himself was styled wrongly as a madman who insisted people worship him or he'll kill them. To the contrary, he was famous for liberating slaves and bringing a standard of social justice and equality to people, very much like the old anti-temple prophets, Amos and Elijah, but mostly he's like Moses, a military leader as well as a governor, legislator, you name it. And then by 1054, things have soured between the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox churches. We'll see the Eastern Orthodox churches claim they're the unchanged church. It's the Pope who got, again, too big for his britches and claimed to be first among equals among the four classic patriarchates. And so at one point then, the Patriarch of Constantinople excommunicates the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, and vice versa, and thus, in a certain way, we could say there's no legitimate church to this day. And the Orthodox also claim that because the Pope assumed so much power, he kind of had to in the Dark Ages, in my humble opinion, that this spawns the Protestant Reformation, the rebellion that will cause really a civil war in Europe. In time, the Arab Islamic Empire gives way to the Turkish Ottoman Islamic Empire, as Mongols and Turks have trashed, well, kind of the whole Eurasian continent, really. And Turks are at the point even of besieging Constantinople, and so the Patriarch of Constantinople calls on help from the Pope of Rome. Hey, we need some armies over here, some people. And thus begins the period of the Crusades, 14, I believe, in all. And the point ostensibly religiously is to liberate the Holy Land from the infidel, as they call them, Muslims. And so one of the first, the Peasants' Crusade, was really a mass migration of Franks, Germans, English, and the like, on their way to Constantinople, where they will trash the city and indiscriminately murder Christians, Jews, and Muslims. But mostly they will be defeated by the Turks, led by, of course, that most famous to the Islamic world, Kurdish leader Salahuddin or Saladin. He will boot them out of there, but not after wave of increasingly well-armed Germans, Franks, and the like. As the legend of the Knights of the Round Table and King and King Richard the Lionhearted and these people attack, for no reason clear to the Muslim world, their own lands. Of course, part of this is an economic search for quick trade routes directly to India. Also, during this period, this medieval age, we see the Catholic Church in this tension, being squeezed by the Islamic world as it felt from the west in Spain, again to the east in Turkey, that really dreadful things happen. The Black Death occurs in Western Europe. Who's to blame? It must be Satan. Satan had not been a big figure in Christianity until the time of the Black Death. And then, since there's no known cause for those people, you can think a poem in English, ring around the rosy, pocket full of posy, ashes, ashes, we all fall down, is a reference to the ring around the welts one gets from the bubonic plague, and the posies that would protect one from evil spirits, and the ashes of the dead bodies cremated throughout Europe. 1 in 3 Europeans in the West died of this Black Death, give or take. And so in a period of extreme times, the Roman Catholic Church in particular will institute the Inquisition to trace down heretical movements like the Cathars, who will be executed by the tens of thousands. The Inquisition in Spain was particularly brutal, as the Castilian Spaniards retake their country from the remnants now of a weakened Islamic presence in Spain. The Catholic Church itself will murder thousands upon thousands of Jews and Muslims and mass deport or exile so many to Morocco. And that launches the Spanish and Portuguese into world empire building. So really the colonies of the Western European nations derive from clashes with the Muslim world, because we can see the conquest of Latin America and the like as a continuing conquest to find trade routes to India, but also to battle the infidel. And then that brings us to the figure of Martin Luther, often considered the signal of the end of the medieval period. And the whole Protestant, and let's call it that, it's a protest against Roman Catholic power. Those Germans got tired of paying taxes to build fabulous cathedrals in Rome. Roman feudal lords also didn't wish to kowtow to bishops any longer. So there's a political and economic aspect to the Protestant Reformation, but it is also theological. Martin Luther is not the first Protestant. John Huss precedes him, and he was burnt at the stake for heresy. For Martin Luther, he shifts, in essence, the authority for the church away from the Pope of Rome to the Bible itself. He will be tried for heresy in the Inquisition, run by the Dominican order. And unlike Galileo, who's going to say, okay guys, the earth is flat, I take it back, Martin Luther said, I will not recant, here I stand, I can do no other, as he's famous for saying. And protected by German princes, literally, he wrote the hymn, A Mighty Fortress is Our God, because he needed a mighty fortress. The Catholics wanted to kill him too. And so while protected by Prince Frederick, he writes a translation from the Greek and Latin of the Bible into German. And with this, he really gets German literature off and running. I think in many ways we can say Martin Luther is the founder of modern German culture. He has some pretty nasty things to say about the popes, as you might imagine. The Pope is a Florentine bastard. That's Martin Luther for you. And with his revolution in religious thought, we see also a revolution of all these northern Europeans against the southern Europeans, we can kind of say. A civil war in Europe resulting in the deaths of millions of people. Protestant Catholic wars that linger on today in Northern Ireland, and resentments that linger elsewhere where the border of these two Protestant and Catholic cultures meet. In time, we'll see the emergence of John Calvin, even more harsh than Martin Luther. He'll get rid of all sacraments, save baptism and communion. Weddings and marriages and the like, they're not going to be sacraments. And so he kind of is considered to have gutted the Christian tradition of so many of its rituals and creeds, and certainly its hierarchy, though he will rule with an iron thumb in the city of Geneva, where he too has to be protected from Roman Catholic authorities. King Henry VIII in England also decides paying taxes to Rome and kowtowing to bishops isn't so fun. And so, unable to get an official divorce statement from the Pope, well, he splits from the Catholic Church and creates the Episcopalian Church. So, the Anglican Church, or Church of England, we can call it, with the head of the church actually now the king. And this becomes the official religion then of England, but it remains very Catholic in structure compared to those Calvinist churches. Those are the ones that will largely permeate and influence the United States, and we'll see almost all presidents are some kind of Calvinist, Christian, Protestant. So that leaves us with then the Orthodox, who we can't consider Protestant. They never split off. They claim to be the original. The Catholics, now spreading throughout Latin America and elsewhere, developing colonies through Spanish and Portuguese acquisitions. And then we have the three major Protestant divisions. The Lutherans up there, the Evangelical or Biblical Church is literally what they call themselves. The Calvinists in Switzerland up through the Netherlands, and on over to the United States in the form of the Puritan Pilgrims, in fact. And then the Episcopalian Church spreading also throughout the world through the dread British Empire. As for the Calvinists, however, we can say one big thing. We see the emergence in England of Oliver Cromwell, a stern Calvinist. He was the first to have his face painted naturally, not prettied up like they do today in the magazines and like they did before realist humanist painting came along. He said, "Paint me warts and all." And he'll rule England with an iron fist, banning Christmas, it's not in the Bible, and colorful clothing, that's too Catholic. And so black and white fashions come into play, and we'll see the Puritan Pilgrims who establish themselves in modern-day Massachusetts will eventually dominate the United States culture landscape. And since the Calvinists are prone to rule themselves as local congregations, we can call them Congregationalists in a general sense. Though a large number of our presidents, even this current one, Obama, is a Congregationalist. So religious freedom in America, according to one of my teachers, Martin Marty, is due to the fact that no single Calvinist church could dominate. They had to compromise. And therefore, the only compromise they could reach was that there should be a separation then of church from state. And so we don't have a Church of England in the United States, and we don't have even among our presidents. Only one has been Roman Catholic, John Kennedy. And to the surprise of many of my students up north, there hasn't even been a Lutheran president. Only one Roman Catholic president, even though Roman Catholics form the largest single denomination in the United States to this day. And you can tend to tell the religious character of a nation by the religion of its leaders. So Calvinist, Protestant, even Puritanism then goes on to create the now, well, American Empire. I think we could call it that. Many will see it that way. And it will be based on hard work, sink or swim, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps because you're ordained as elect to heaven. If you're wealthy, you must have worked hard. And if you're poor, well, that's your damnation in a sense. So it's a rather hardcore and determined form of Christianity, quite unlike the Orthodox or even then the Catholic, I will say more mystical traditions. So that in short is a brief overview of Christianity. Of course, as ever, there's so much more to say.